Welcome back to Midnight Streaming with Jess and Julia. I'm Jess.
And I'm Julia.
Our episode today is about suspense and dramatic irony, two things that Babylon Berlin does extremely well.
The whole show is imbued with a sense of dread that is really poetic and beautiful, but also apocalyptic at the same time. So we're going to focus a lot on how the creators use history and the audience's prior knowledge or lack of knowledge to generate tension, as well as how they build suspense through set design, cinematography, and character.
I think a good way to start off is by picking a few scenes that really showcase the show's use of dramatic irony and suspense on a more individual basis. The first scene that we're going to talk about takes place in episode 6 of season 1, which takes place at the rowing club.
So we're introduced to Fritz and Otto while they're standing like knee-deep in Lake Wannsee. It's kind of a cutaway from the main scene, which is like with Charlotte and Stefan and Rudy and all of their friends. And we see Fritz and Otto standing there talking to each other, and Fritz says, "Mass executions are a legitimate tool of the revolution. Expropriation too, by the way." And Otto responds, "Who said that, Hitler?" And Fritz responds, "No, Lenin." So I think what the showrunners are trying to say in this scene, which I think it's a pretty funny scene, it's dark, but it's funny, is a little bit like maybe they're getting at the horseshoe theory, which is basically a kind of a disproven political science theory that at the extreme ends of the political spectrum, instead of being like a straight line where you have communism on the left and fascism on the right, it's a horseshoe where they kind of like meet in the middle. They're similar at the extremes, and I don't really buy into that theory. Essentially what they're saying is it almost doesn't matter which of these men they're quoting because they're still promoting violence as a means of inducing political change. And so I think it's really funny to like juxtapose this scene against this like idyllic day at the lake with all of these young people. And I think that's also another example of dramatic irony is you see all of these happy people at the lake, and it's like a reminder of the fact that this is not permanent. It's extremely temporary and ephemeral, and how much these people's lives are going to be destroyed in the next 10 years.
I think also a different sense of dramatic irony comes in when you rewatch the show. Because I know that we went back and we looked at a couple of episodes and scenes just for research purposes. And at that point, you don't know that the two of them are Nazis posing as communists. The next scene that we're going to talk about is in season 2, episode 10, which is the scene that Stefan Janneke gets murdered.
So this scene takes place when Stefan is walking alone at night. He's in like the abandoned factory, which is a shortcut to Walter's house where Garion is staying with Helga and Moritz. And he's walking through this kind of like shadowy, dark, abandoned factory. He stops to ask a man for directions. And for a second, it feels like that man maybe is dangerous to him. But it's such an ominous scene. It's so dark and shadowy, and it's very classic. I don't think it pulls away from those tropes at all. It just does them very well. And we start to see like these men following him, and we see Stefan panicking, and like kudos to the actor in this scene because it's a terrifying scene.
One way they do this is through cinematography. So they use shaky cam, which essentially just means that the camera isn't stable. It follows behind the actors as if you're seeing it from somebody's point of view, as if you're watching in.
You're almost glancing over his shoulder with him.
Exactly.
And you feel his panic the whole time. Because you start to see, like, there's, like, 4 men kind of blocking his path the whole way. And the camera work really shows, like, there is no way out. And so it's just, like, it's like one of those yelling at the TV kind of scenes where you're like, oh, like, you just know what's gonna happen.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
You see that set in with the character as well.
It's almost like you're there with him, urging him to run faster.
Mm-hmm.
But there's nothing you can do.
I would have told him don't go into a creepy abandoned factory at night.
That was the bad idea. So another way that they create suspense is through the music that plays the entire scene. And
my favorite song.
It's really just classic horror, creepy sounding music. You know, they use the high-pitched strings. They create this dissonance. And it's meant to make you uncomfortable.
One of the shows that I watched recently that I think has like the best sound design I've ever heard is Chernobyl, the HBO show. And I don't really think there's much music at all. If there's any at all in the whole show, it's like metal screeching on metal.
It's a classic horror technique. Like, we see it in the movie Psycho, in the scene in the shower. You know, there's the high-pitched screeching noises created by string instruments. It's meant to make you uncomfortable. It almost hurts your ears. It makes your skin crawl. And there's a little bit of that going on behind the entire scene.
And the abandoned factory, I think, is a really cool set for it. Rusting, like falling apart, decaying old factory. Kind of, it's like almost like a metaphor, I think, for the system that's underlying the Weimar Republic as a whole. Nobody is really there to protect you. You're kind of on your own, like the way Yannicka is.
So the climax of the scene occurs when Stefan gets to the stairs to get up. He thinks he's about to escape. Suddenly, the music stops, everything goes silent, and you're staring down the barrel of the gun for a good 2 to 3 seconds. It's almost as if you're seeing through his eyes. That's his perspective. He's coming face to face with his own death in that moment. The camera then flips around. You see Stefan's face for only a moment or two, and then he dies.
And you're seeing that, I guess, from the killer's perspective. So I guess maybe that is a hint there that the killer is a character whose perspective we've seen before.
Oh, yeah.
We know who's after Stefan. We saw him in the same episode create commotion on the street while he's kind of recklessly spying on this like right-wing lunch date.
So romantic.
He's not being very careful. A kid accuses him of having stolen a camera, and he creates some commotion, and he doesn't really handle it very well, and Bruno sees him. Stefan doesn't know that Bruno has seen him, and also Stefan doesn't know that Bruno has seen the spilled ink in his desk, which he did not clean up very well at all because he was too busy flirting with Charlotte. That was a serious mistake. But we know that Stefan is in danger kind of through the whole season. There's like little hints dropped. Bruno is extremely paranoid from the beginning of the show because he knows that someone is spying on him. Slowly, I think we begin to realize who it is. And so when that scene happened, when I first watched the show, I didn't really immediately think that it was Bruno, because I think they've done a good job of setting up Bruno as like this very contradictory character, and you're kind of like questioning whether or not he would actually do something that serious. The way that the show sets up all these like little clues is you can't help but suspect him. And so we see Stefan in this scene. He's running to tell Garion information about Bruno at Bruno's house, which seems also a little bit reckless. Mm-hmm. But we know how much danger he's in, and he doesn't know. This is a great example of how the writers rely on not just our knowledge of history, but of the detective genre to create suspense. So the next scene we're going to talk about is the Operation Prongertog scene, in which the coup that's been taking place for all of the second season finally comes to a head at the Threepenny Opera, where Minister Briand and Minister Streisman are seated, and Bruno and his team of renegade police officers turned coup masters are planning to assassinate the both of them and essentially start a series of events that will lead to General Ludendorff taking over the country.
So, interesting little side note about the Threepenny Opera. While we were watching the show, I was actually doing a project on Bertolt Brecht, who is the playwright.
You randomly chose him, right?
Yeah, I recognized the name, and I was like, yeah, sure, I could pick him as my research topic. And in my research, I found out that he was a pretty well-known Marxist in Berlin at the time. So I think it's interesting that the coup takes place at this highly political play, because he was known for putting Marxist ideologies in all of his works.
So in this scene, Garion is rushing to try and stop this coup. He's like pieced it together based on some announcements on the radio. The dramatic irony in this scene is because we know that Garion is going to succeed, even though the show sets it up as like a classic suspenseful scene. It's like a climactic point in the season. And I think that's really clever. They use a lot of really suspenseful music and camera angles and things like that, and Garion has to get through all these obstacles to get into the opera. At the core of it, we know that Operation Prongertog is not going to succeed. This show is pretty faithful to history, and so regardless of what happens, the coup is going to fail. They have this like imaginary scene where the operators of the coup are talking about what is their plan, and it's like essentially to reinstate the Kaiser. This is a pipe dream. You know, that ship has long sailed. Everybody knows this is very unlikely to actually succeed, and it never actually happened in real life. But even so, we're still really invested in the suspense of the scene.
So one of the things that you mentioned was the sound throughout the scene, which I feel like sound and background music is one of the most classic ways to build suspense in film and television. The reason why I'm talking about sound so much is because I actually took a sound design class last semester. So we talked about a lot of the techniques that filmmakers tend to use when trying to create a specific tone, a specific mood, create suspense, things like that. So if you listen to the background music during the scene, which is pretty prominent because there's no real dialogue that takes place other than the background noise with the play that's going on, it sounds almost like a ticking time bomb. You know, it's very methodical. It really builds up suspense. It makes you uncomfortable. You can tell that something is about to happen, that something is coming.
And I think that's a good example of like in-show aspects, which you've been kind of focusing on, and out-of-show aspects coming together. All of these cinematography and sound effects, all of those techniques kind of join together to build this suspense, despite the fact that the entire audience knows what the outcome is going to be.
So something that was really helpful for me throughout watching this entire show was having a history major sitting next to me, because obviously I don't know as much about German history as Julia does. I remember asking you during this part, you know, like, did this actually happen? Was this a real operation? And obviously it didn't. Why did they include it? Like, what is the significance behind this, like, fictional operation?
So one of the things I think is interesting is that the show writers, essentially they can fictionalize history to a very small extent within a certain set of parameters. Essentially, if they change any major events, which this is a major event, if they actually have consequences from that major event, then it changes the course of history and it's no longer really accurate. And I think this show is fairly accurate, if not in like every single detail, at least in the spirit of the details. And so this operation never happened. The real Black Reichswehr in real life was dissolved in 1923, the year that there were a lot of left-wing and right-wing coups. So that was like a very unstable year. And by 1929, things have stabilized to a degree. They're about to get real unstable again. But this storyline, I think, exists, it provides Garion with like something else besides the train to kind of focus on, and a way for him to intercede with history, which is like really what this show is about, is people interacting with history without any real consequences for his own life. And it also illustrates, I think, the authoritarian political climate in which the elites and a lot of regular people had just given up on trying to change the state from within. Politics are becoming less civil and more violent, and which led to the constant attempts at destabilization. And Seegers, Walter, Neeson, Wendt, they all represent important aspects of the political system, which we'll get into in a future episode a little bit more. But on the surface, they all seem like these really respectable, ideal German upper-class men, and yet they're political extremists. And I think this story is trying to show really like the dirty and dark nature of political extremism, because it doesn't look that scary when you see them all out to lunch outside in Berlin chatting about this coup. But then you see it in action and you start to realize like just how sinister this is becoming, how much violence they're willing to commit to get the kind of political system they want. And it also highlights the ease with which politics can become a deadly struggle in such a corrupt and polarized society where people don't really have intersecting interests, and they're all kind of, at least the elites, are looking out solely for their own interests.
So perhaps the most glaringly obvious example of dramatic irony and suspense occurs throughout the entirety of season 3.
Wait, oh no, what's gonna happen? Oh, right, the Great Depression.
Oh, right,
okay.
yes, that, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now I remember.
So the first thing that we see in this season is Garion walking through the bank, and it's just complete chaos. Everything sounds kind of muffled. There's people dying around him, people running around, people throwing papers. He gets hit by a stampede when he opens the front door.
People are shooting themselves right in front of him, like multiple people.
There was an article in Refinery 29 written by Ariana Romero where she analyzes the scene a little deeper.
She uses the phrase fog of war, essentially that Garion is being brought back to his days in World War I. It's very hard to watch.
It seems almost like he's having a flashback. It's almost as if it's triggering his PTSD, and understandably so.
We've seen the way, it kind of reminds me of the flashback scenes where we'll see how he panicked on the battlefield, And then this scene is sort of, the cinematography is sort of similar, the muffled sound. It's like he's having a panic attack and you're inside his head. So obviously what's coming is the Great Depression. And I think Americans' perception of the crash and the depression is even less severe than it was in Germany. Because like I mentioned in our first episode, Germany was taking out loans from the United States to pay back their war reparations. And when the American economy crashed, the German economy just completely bottomed out. And one of the things I think is really important to remember is in the US, for our American listeners, we had a more stable, functional government. So they were able to do things like public works, and they were able to have FDIC for insurance. They were able to get the New Deal done, so people had Social Security, and there was some sort of safety net. Whereas in Germany, this is one of my favorite historical anecdotes of all time, Chancellor Brüning, who's like the political leader of the country, Hindenburg is still the president, he refused to do what any leader should do in an economic crisis and prime the pump. And instead, he started taxing people, he took away unemployment benefits, and he essentially let his own country's economy fail on purpose in the hopes that the Entente powers would see this and let Germany out of its reparations requirements. This didn't work. And instead, what it did is it created a deep, severe, long depression in which there was really no social safety net for people who suddenly lost everything. And as we see in the scene, people, and through the whole season, people lost absolutely everything in this. They were invested with money that was like 10 times what they could make in a lifetime. So if any of you find yourselves as like the leader of a country during an economic crash, please prime the pump and don't do what Brüning did and destroy your own country's economy on purpose. Anyway.
Political and financial advice with Julia.
You're welcome. So one of the main characters in the season, or not the main, but he gets a bigger role, is Wegner, who's Neeson's assistant. And Neeson sends him out on like this reporting, fact-finding mission to find out just how bad the situation with the stock market is, because Neeson has started to piece together kind of exactly what's going on, where stockbrokers are selling people stocks that they think will make them rich, and because the stock market in the United States is climbing and climbing, that it can never fail. And they try to sell it to people by saying, you know, you can buy multiple different stocks and have a whole portfolio, and that way if one doesn't do well, then the rest of them will still make you money, and there's no way to lose, which is obviously not true, because what if all of them don't do well? So Wegner goes to all of these different people. He interviews people, like he interviews workers, he interviews Bohm, who works at the police station, people from all different walks of life, and essentially finds out that people have invested their entire life savings, their net worths, money that they'll never be able to pay back, in the hopes that they're going to strike it rich, under the false impression that it's a gold mine and nobody can fail on the stock market. His face when he's finding out this information, there's one scene where he just looks so devious, and he looks like it's almost gleeful, where he can't believe that people are this stupid, which I don't really blame the people. I wouldn't understand it either.
The interesting thing here is that while obviously we know that Neeson is right, his projections are correct, nobody really believes him. He kind of gets written off as this crazy guy because of his bipolar disorder.
He's a little bit of a Cassandra from Greek mythology, where he's correct. He can see the future, but nobody believes him. And he's kind of frustrated by the fact that his own things about himself, like his bipolar disorder, hold him back from being taken seriously. And it's to everyone's detriment this time.
Yeah, because we know he's onto something very, very real and very dangerous.
There's one like funny moment when Neeson is having the meeting with Seegers and all of these important people in finance and in the government, and he's pitching them his idea, and they're all acting like he has no idea what he's talking about, like this is impossible. There's an economist there who's like, this shows no understanding of economics, this is ridiculous. And if I were an economist, if I were like calling myself an expert, I got called into a meeting like that, and I loudly announced that like there's absolutely no way this will ever happen, and it happened a month later, I would like shoot myself into outer space.
I would leave. I would kindly see myself out.
That would be it for me. So that's pretty embarrassing for that guy.
I remember during that scene just like yelling at the TV, "Oh my God, you're so dumb." Because like,
how could they not have put together this deeply mathematical global financial problem? Jess and I would do that in a heartbeat.
Oh yeah, we would
see it coming.
You all know how we're,
mathing,
stellar economists over here. So another interesting facet to the fact that, we know what's going on throughout the entire season is that even in all the very light and fun scenes, there's this apocalyptic feeling behind it. And, they're still kind of stuck in the roaring 20s where they're all out partying and doing drugs, listening to jazz music, and there are all of these very extravagant Gatsby-esque club scenes.
Even the partying is extreme, and I think that's an interesting parallel to the fact that everything else in Weimar society is becoming extreme. The politics are becoming extreme. They're about to face an extreme financial crash, and so there's kind of people are just being pushed to the limits of the human experience.
They're going higher and higher, which makes the crash of it all so much worse. So within most of these club scenes that are very extravagant, there's confetti everywhere, there's champagne, people
very
are dancing.
Decadent.
Yeah, the music is very upbeat. It kind of leads into the mood that these people kind of think nothing can touch them at this point. But what contributes to this underlying apocalyptic feeling really is the music. Because while it is so upbeat and happy, if you look at the lyrics, how do I say
they're
this?
pretty explicitly about life and death, and
yeah.
And they use the word apocalypse in a couple of the songs.
Oh yeah, a lot of the lyrics are very dark. They're talking about death. They're talking about the end of time.
And I think the singers are speaking English, in the show, so I know that's not a mistranslation.
Yeah. It's an interesting contrast between the high energy, high fun of these parties and then these dark, meaningful lyrics. It almost acts as the writer's way of communicating directly to us. It's a fourth wall break.
Because one of the things I think that is so great about the show is the tension, because they're not mentioning the things that you're when are they going to mention this? Hitler's name is not even mentioned until the scene with Otto and Fritz, and it's very in passing. And then we only see a photo of him in season 3. And all of these things that you feel you're I know these things are coming, and you wonder when they're going to touch on them, they don't really touch on at all. And that's why I think the lyrics are such a direct line of communication from the writers to the audience, is it's almost an acknowledgement of the dramatic irony and the fact that we all know what's about to go down, but just watch.
So another thing that Ariana Romero discusses in her Refinery 29 article is the monster that we see in the final scene of season 3 that's kind of lurking under the streets of Berlin. And it's interesting because it's not realistic.
That's very clearly surrealist, and I think they got a lot more comfortable with that in season 3. Garion is an unreliable narrator, and I think they really lean into that in season 3, and they lean into all of these kind of surrealist occult elements. And I think that is a reference to the 1930s and the genre and all these classic noir movies. They're obviously referencing Metropolis in season 3, but more so than that, I think that is that's kind of one of the most potent symbols we've seen in the whole show.
The monster itself appears to represent this danger that's lurking just below the streets of Berlin. That's another reference to something the audience knows that the characters don't quite know yet, that as bad as things are right now, there's something in the distance, or something brewing underneath the streets that hasn't come to the surface yet, that we're about to find out.
And I think this is a really interesting symbol because we're in October 1929, and in the 1930 elections is when the Nazi Party increased its number of seats from 12 to 107 in the Reichstag. So we're getting very, very close to the edge of this cliff where the Roaring Twenties are about to end in a very dramatic way. And now we're starting to get into a very serious period of time where we're in a deep financial recession, a depression, and all of a sudden, the political extremism that we see in the streets is starting to get into the institutions of the Weimar Republic. And so all of the characters that we know and love are at the precipice of the worst period of their lives. And it's very suspenseful, it's very dark, and the dramatic irony is it keeps you really invested, but it's also kind of painful to know that your favorite characters, all these characters that are really well developed and interesting, we know that there's no escaping the history.
I think it's kind of a perfect way to end the season too, because it's kind of a cliffhanger without actually being a cliffhanger. Because technically you know what's coming next because it's a historical show.
You really can't have a cliffhanger.
Yeah, you know what happens in the timeline. The suspense comes in because you don't know how each of these characters are going to deal with the changing times. We know how the events happen historically, but we don't yet know how all the characters are going to react to it and how they're going to be impacted by it.
I think that's the sign of a really well-written show, is there's no mystery here. We know exactly how events are going to unfold in the grand scheme of things, but I think we're so invested. The show is so driven by character and development that even though they're boxed in by history, we're still really invested in their own personal development, their personal achievements, even though it is kind of sad to think that Charlotte did all of these things to become a female detective at the police department in Berlin, and she's not going to be that for long.
None of these characters are flat. They all have very interesting arcs, and now it's just a matter of where they're going to go and how they're going to be affected by history.
This era of history as like an artistic subject is really fascinating to me because a lot of societies were slowly crumbling through the 1920s, like spurred on by this decadence and corruption, and then they collapsed all at once in this very dramatic fashion, which is it's the reason it's one of my favorite periods of history. But it's also really interesting just for all of the human experiences and the lessons that you can mine from this time period, because in the show, external events are driving the plot regardless of the characters' choices. It really doesn't matter if Garion and Helga get together or they don't, or if Garion, goes to the police station one day or he doesn't, because what's going to happen is going to happen. And I think that is sort of a realistic take on history.
The characters have free will, and yet they also don't.
Yeah, essentially, like they're, as all people are in the real world, their choices are limited by the systems that they live in, the structures that they live under. And I think this brings me back to kind of why Jess and I think this is the main question of Babylon Berlin, which is how free will and the flow of history interact. Can we make our own choices when our institutions and the people running them are shaping our lives? And at what point can individual action no longer protect us from collective choices?
Something that Julia and I were talking about a little earlier today actually was how we see climate change as kind of a modern example for this. So I'm in a class right now called Climate Change in Society. So something that we kind of discussed was how people tend to focus on individual actions, how we can recycle, we can reduce our own carbon emissions. But at the end of the day, if not everybody is on board and we don't start to make systemic changes, societal changes, we're not all doing things together, we're not going to see large changes.
Midnight Streaming Podcast is very pro-recycling and reducing consumption. I just want to make that clear.
Yes, absolutely. We're very eco-friendly here.
But those things are too minor to matter when there is no systemic change and there's no desire for a systemic change. And the reason I think climate change is such a good metaphor is because there are people in our society who refuse to believe in it, or maybe, I don't know if they really refuse to believe in it or they just think it's convenient to do so, but they're actively working against solutions to this huge problem that is going to affect everybody in the world, everyone in our society. And that's something that happens in the show where they're talking about the Weimar system. Individual people, Garion can be a good police officer and stop a coup from happening, which, on its own is a really good thing. But at the end of the day, the system that's been created by people who are much higher up than him makes sure that the political situation will not end up going well. And there are people in their society that are actively working against improving the political system from within in the democratic way in favor of overthrowing it for their own political means, their own personal means. And climate change is sort of a similar thing where at the end of the day, if everybody doesn't have a common goal, we're not going to be able to solve this problem.
It shows us that individual actions can only go so far without actual systemic societal change. We can only do so much within the limitations of the system that we were given.
Before we go, we want to thank all of you for making our first episode a success.
We have a lot of fun producing this podcast, and we're so glad you all tuned in.
Light your candles, get some rose petals ready, because our next episode is going to be about sex, love, and romance in Babylon Berlin.
If you have any questions or comments, you can email us at midnightstreamingpodcast@gmail.com and follow us on Instagram at midnightstreaming.
Thanks for staying up with us. See you next time. you.